Welcome. I would say we have a great session, and I say that every session, but once again, we really do have an awesome session today. I am so excited to dig in with you and Todd. Now, hopefully you did your Google stalking before this. If you are new here, we get right into it. We dig right into the good stuff. So I know there are some podcasts or LinkedIn Lives that you may have joined previously that the first 15 minutes are going over the person's story and who they are. That's other shows. That's not this show. This show, we spend our time getting right into the good stuff. Why? Because you have Google. You already know how to do that. Hopefully you have already Googled Todd. We'll put all this information in the chat. If you haven't already, do a little catch up quickly, do a little Googling, get caught up with who he is and what he's doing. But I'll give you a little rundown. If you didn't do your homework, I got you. Okay, I'll do a little rundown. But boy, oh boy, Todd is a master when it comes to all things leadership. He is an author, he's an educator, he is a coach. This blows my mind. We actually went and counted. He has 30 courses on LinkedIn. Not 3, not 5, not 10, not 15, 30. 30 courses. I mean, holy moly, this guy is a powerhouse of information, of content, of helpful tips and tricks and tactics. And that's why I was like, we got to get him with us today, because especially as we go into the end of the year, it's November, December, when we start to think about leadership and management, some of us might be having some conversations about promotions, raises, new jobs, hiring people. So I wanted to make sure that when we really ended out this year, I immediately was like, we got to get Todd in here, because Todd is going to really help us with some of these year-end conversations, especially when it comes to dealing with like leadership and management, which I don't know about you, but can be super intimidating and super scary. So please help me raise your glass, whatever's in it, and help me welcome Todd to our coffee meeting.
Hey, how are you, Kim?
How's it going?
I am well. I also am enjoying a beverage that is not an adult beverage.
And what is in your cup?
I'm a water fiend these days.
Flavored water or just the good old fashioned kind?
The old traditional kind. I have 2 cups of coffee. That's kind of my thing. And after that, I'm just a water person.
I love it. Well, for anyone that didn't do their homework on you, if you were joining us in a coffee shop and someone scooted up a seat and I was like, hey, you've got to meet my friend Todd, how do you even describe all the stuff it is that you do? Because you do a lot of stuff.
I do a lot of stuff. I'm happy to say I'm very busy. That's a great question. I think the best answer is I'm a reformed professor. I was a professor for many years, and I love teaching leadership and related courses to a bunch of graduate students. Before that, Anderson and Ernst & Young. And for the last decade, give or take, I'm a full-time solopreneur making courses, as you mentioned, thank you kindly, and writing books and giving speeches. That kind of dominates what I do these days.
Amazing. Well, I was really excited to have you on today, because when I was thinking about, we're ending the year, it's November, December, there's going to be some people, if you work in corporate, you might be having like those year-end meetings, those kind of performance review type meetings. Or if you own your own business, you might be thinking about year-end, kind of 2022, what's going on, which I kind of feel like that's your sweet spot, like leadership management, like that's your sweet spot, right?
Yeah, no doubt about it. I got lucky many years ago. I just fell in love with an area that turned out to be not just something I was fascinated by, but something that, well, everyone needs to understand and most people find interesting, but to your point, maybe sometimes complex. And that's why being a voice in that area is useful to people. I mean, my specific fascination really does come down to the people side of it, the psychology of individual growth, the psychology of what makes teams really function well. What does a great leader actually do to help people become better versions of themselves? All those types of people equation issues really fascinate me.
I'm curious with you, as you kind of talk to people and people are coming to you, you get, again, whether it's through your LinkedIn learning courses or your books or your sessions, like you must get a ton of questions. And so I'm really like, to be nerdy, I'm super curious if there's like 1 or 2 questions that you just feel like, man, everybody asks me about this.
You know, there's a handful that really do repeat for sure. And every single day, and I'm not complaining, I'm grateful for this. Every single day, there's thousands of people that watch some of my content somewhere. And then somewhere around planet Earth, they craft a message, usually on LinkedIn, and send it to me. Sometimes it's an email, sometimes whatever. And I love it. So I hear, you know, my boss is kind of nuts. I've done, I think, the right things, and they're not getting it. They're not giving me the opportunities I'm looking for. Some version of that, very, very common. Or I have a colleague who's driving everyone nuts. We don't know what to, some version of that, very, very common, which is actually unfortunate to hear, but great for my career. And how do I get promoted is one of them. You just mentioned that. And I love talking about those. Here's the good news. These are not mysteries. They just kind of feel like that when you're busy every day and you wish you had the answer now without a lot of mental hurdles to go through. The truth is, these are not mysteries. We know some pretty good answers for each of these things if you'll just stop for a minute and start to think a little logically about them. That's why it's fun to share this with people, because I know they're real problems, to your point.
Well, let's dive into like sort of the end of the year stuff. Like if someone is leaning forward and they're like, oh, Todd just mentioned getting a promotion, like I want one of those, or you know, I want that senior leadership position. What are things that people should be thinking about now that we're getting towards the end of the year that you just think, man, you got to start nailing down these things?
Well, you know, it's a tougher question than normal for sure, because everyone for the last year plus has been trying to say, man, that was a tough thing we just went through, right? I guess we're into a new normal now, or some version of that, but this thing won't quite go away, and we don't know what the new normal is going to look like yet. So there is a preface to answering that question, which is, wow, I do love and respect people listening. I do recognize it has been a weird, unexpected, ongoing, strange thing. Okay, with all that in mind, you might want to be this much more plotting, thoughtful, and cautious, really, as you try to do anything that's proactive in your career. Having said that, to get promoted is not a mystery. I'm going to give you an answer that works that you might not like, but once it works, you're going to be happy. The best answer is not to finally get up the courage, which is what most people do. Honestly, this is non-scientific. I would say 7 out of 10 people, they do this. They try to get up the courage and go have the conversation. That can be useful, and sometimes it will work. Most of the time it causes tension because it's unexpected and it's not put into context correctly. The best way to get a promotion isn't to go stand on the right hill and try and die for that thing. No. The best strategy is to talk about with the person who will have authority or most authority to get you to promoted. Have the conversation about, you know, what does it look like, that situation where promoting me kind of is a no-brainer. What are the new skills? What are the accomplishments? What are the tasks that I need to be focused on? The project wins, the new clients, whatever it might be. What is success in getting me promoted later? I'm talking 3 months based on opportunity, maybe 24 months based on opportunity. I'm not concerned with the time, but I want to be ready, and I want to be a decision people are excited about. Let's talk about that person, boss, or whoever your supervisor might be. Let them start articulating specific things that you can go get under your win belt. And then this is the thing. 12 months later, whenever the opportunity is there and you're trying to vie for an opportunity again, if you get it, man, it's wonderful. This is a payoff. Good for you. If you don't get it, you will have prepared correctly, sent all the right signals internally for other opportunities, and maximized your resume for potential external opportunities as well. That is the smarter, slightly longer term, best route to a promotion.
I love that piece of advice. And I would say if anybody like me is, you know, furiously taking notes in their head, don't worry. You can go to sendmenotes.com and we'll actually send you all these tips and tricks that Todd is sharing with us. So you're not like, I missed that part that Todd said. Don't worry. You can just go to Send Me Notes and we'll send you a recap of all the notes. But I want to touch on that, Todd, because I also think that this method works really, really well if you are like me and own your own business, or you're like a founder, you have a side hustle. I actually think that same approach works really well with clients and long-term clients. Like I have clients that, you know, maybe I work with on a short-term project or whatever, and I kind of do very similar to what you said. I say, hey, 2022 is coming up. I'd like to work with you again, or maybe in a larger capacity or a bigger deal. What would that look like? You know, what would I need to do, or what do you need, or what are your goals? And then I can figure out how I can hopefully fit in there. And that way, when all of a sudden they ask for RFPs or that comes up in March of 2022 or April of 2022, I've already asked the question in November of 2021 what I needed to do to be ready for that opportunity. So I actually think that that is great advice, even if you're not in corporate, even if you have your own company too.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. See, the way I would jump on saying, yes, I love those comments and enhance them if possible is to say this. You have what you do as a pro. You do, I do, everyone does. If you're some version of a small business or a solopreneur, it's not like you do 100 things. You usually do 2 or 3, something like that. But then you touch base with all those clients, not knowing what those needs are. And then thanks to the advice Kim just gave, they start to help inform you a little bit about what they're up to and what's going to matter to them in the coming months, quarters, or years. And because they've shared that in specific words that you can think about, you can then talk about or shape, dare I say, what it is you have to offer in terms of what they're focused on. This is relationship 101. This is selling 101. I understand you've got a hammer, but maybe they don't think they're holding a nail. Great. Then what do they think that they're holding? And is there a way that what you have to offer might address that specific thing? And you'll never know unless you listen to you, Kim, and actually start asking those questions. Great point.
So true. So true. And I have this question I was really excited to ask you today. And I should say, I have a list of excited questions, but I don't want to hog all your time. So by the way, if you guys have questions, put them in the chat because you're part of this coffee conversation as well, where we're all at the same coffee table, proverbially together. But one of the questions I was really excited to ask you, because I was talking to a friend about it the other day, what are your thoughts on these sort of like year-end conversations? Could be with HR or could be with your boss, could be like these 360 reviews. What do you think about those? Are those good? Are those bad? Are they useful? Are they not useful?
I think it depends. One of my favorite answers, and that was, by the way, even when I was still practicing social scientist, that was one of my favorite answers. I think it depends. I have the privilege as a outsider to be a little more raw and honest, even when people don't like it. And I think kind of that's why a lot of people like me, is that I at least am being straight with them and they can take it and use it as they see fit. I think the following, you ready? No formal, infrequent conversation will ever be as developmental, transformational for a person as a frequent, informal conversation will be. I've said that for 20 years. I stand by it, even though thankfully corporations are evolving in some really pro people, interesting ways. It's still true. No infrequent, over paper filled, over software driven, infrequent, formal, on the record conversation will ever trump the genuine power of a frequent, informal, more authentic and genuine conversation. So I would never say something silly, Kim, like, you know what, evals are for the birds and we should stop investing in them. I'm not going to say that because there's very important reasons we do it. And there can be very useful developmental things that come out of them. I do think they're overplayed and sometimes overinvested in, could be streamlined and simplified in a lot of ways. But much more importantly, I'm not saying they're irrelevant. Much more importantly, they can be put into perspective as useful, but not all knowing if in fact on the one-on-one basis across every direct report a leader has, they would form ongoing dialogues that were less filtered, respectful, for sure, but candid and ongoing, because that's the context in which real conversation that moves people to change happens.
Well, and I think you just touched on such a great point, which is also perspective. I always think when you go into conversations and you're thinking about it like exactly that, we're having a conversation, you know, my boss and I are having a conversation, or my senior advisor and I are having a conversation, as opposed to sometimes I think what happens with any sort of year-end reviews or goal setting,
Sure.
Don't even get me started on goal setting. There's all this pressure of like, because you kind of lost perspective and you're like, it's this one meeting, it's my one chance to ask for a raise, or it's my one chance to ask for that title or that award or that honor or whatever it is. And you sort of hype yourself up and you work yourself up into like this tizzy basically. And it puts all of this added pressure on you instead of just going in and being like, it's a conversation, just like a conversation I would have on a Tuesday or last week or last month. It's another conversation.
Correct. I mean, if you do the work, dare I say, as a subordinate to whoever you're reporting to, if you do the work over time to get that ongoing informal thing really on the regular where it needs to be, you'll feel like you're suggesting a whole lot more comfortable because there's no mysteries going in. Let me give your audience a serious quick tidbit. Human memory is not great. One of the greatest things we know from cognitive psychology is that humans have very suspect memories, and there's a lot of interesting research there. But the punchline is you don't have to worry about that if you don't allow big gaps to happen in between. We're staying in touch, staying in the loop, staying up to speed on each other conversations. That's why the infrequent, informal tends to matter, I think, even more.
Well, and I love this point from Anya, like when you're talking about these infrequent, informal check-ins, but some of us also might still be remote.
Yeah.
Like we're not in the office, so we can't just like breeze by with like a cup of coffee, like, hey Charlie, how's it going? Like how do you create these like easy breezy cheesy moments if we're still remote?
Well, first of all, you're doing a great job right now with coffee, I assume. So it is possible remotely. Anja, that's a great question. It's not an easy one per se. The answer is you do still try to make touches happen. And the only way I can really give you some good advice for the remote person is don't make them the same. So follow me for just a second. You want variety. Variety is a hedge against the nature of human memory I was talking about a minute ago. So don't do the same thing the same way all the time in remote life. If you want to touch base with somebody twice a week because you have to, 3 times a week because you want to, mix it up how you do that. Right now, we're doing it one way. Great. The team's all gathered around and we're doing a status update, boring but necessary. Great. Next time, you're just asking a question about something they're working on because you were curious. Next time, you're sharing something you did that may or may not impact them. Next time, it's social, not task-based, and you're going, how are you doing? Did you hear about something that just happened? I'm fascinated. Is this adding to your stress like it's adding to mine? Those are all different ways, and I could keep going, that you kind of think about the subject, the reason, the driver for connecting. Mix those things up and make sure one of them is the informal, performance-based check-in, and that would be a good place to start thinking about it.
Yeah, it's such a good point because you can even vary it up with the, oh, I just want to meet you for 5 minutes on Zoom, or I want to meet you for 10 minutes or 20 minutes or an hour. Like even just varying up the ways or the time schedules in which you're meeting, I think can also be really helpful as well.
A lot of people, how do you feel about this, Kim? A lot of people think channels and the growing number of channels is actually a problem. I think it's mostly useful. Some of these conversations, Zoom, boom, some phone calls, some email, couple over there on Slack. I think generally that's useful. 4 or 5 channels. Sometimes people will then use them for certain types of topics, and that's the way norms form on remote teams. That's just fine. It gives you more ways to think about, given the topic I want to talk about, which way should I try and connect with them?
And I always say to people, I agree. I'm like you. I don't mind all the forms of conversation, but I always say, figure out what form is best for the person that you're trying to connect with. So I remember I used to have this boss. She was terrible with email. Terrible. You'd send her email inbox, looked like a Skittles bag exploded, like all the sort of like red, green, there was 30,000 emails in there. It was a disaster. But if you called her, if you got her on the phone, it was fine. You got your answers, you got what you needed to get. So I always tell people too, kind of don't just do what works for you. Well, I like email. So like, I'm going to, do this via email or Zoom or whatever it is. Like do whatever is also going to work best for the other person or what maybe you get the best response with. If you see that you have a boss or a client or a partner and they sort of never show up for Zoom calls, they're always late, they're always whatever, but phone calls, there were no problem. They're in the car, they're walking the dog, whatever. Then like maybe stick to phone calls. Sure. And not try to fit a square peg into a round hole and like, we must make Zoom happen. It's like, well, no, it's just, it's not their preference. It's not what they're vibing on.
A lot of people get hung up on the documentation side of email. Oh, now there's a great record and it's wonderfully organized. You're on the money, of course. Try and think about them more than you in terms of which channel helps them receive the message better. Also think about timing. Some people really are. First thing in the morning for 2 hours, they're just an open book, and then I don't see them until the next day, and that's the way it works. Think first, then communicate, and think about the channel and the timing, and you're much more likely to hit home and get a response that's useful for sure.
And so what happens if someone's like, okay, like I got it, Todd, I'm going to reach out to my boss in the morning and it's going to be on Zoom and that's where they're best, whatever. But I'm sort of lacking the confidence. Like I'm not feeling super great about going and having this conversation or doing this. How do you advise people to kind of boost their confidence or maybe work on some of that a little bit?
Well, man, love that question because it's very important and I find it very interesting. It's also not simple. We could do this for an hour. So you just raise a hand when it's time for Todd, shut up. So confidence comes partially from your personality. There's a foundation you're born with, for better or for worse, and that comes through however much it comes through. And then on top of that, it is meaningfully true that you can think of it as a skill you can build. That's great news for all of us who have moments, where we lack confidence. You can gain confidence by building skills, building expertise. You can gain confidence by spending cognitive time thinking back to the wins that prove you are a decent person and can go do this next thing. You can gain confidence by really trying to craft an environment around you in terms of the people that contributes more to your competence and to your positivity than questioning your competence and really negatively contributing to the mood, the vibe that's around. We just overindulge and accept so much that it's crazy. So there's a good 10 things I would mention that answer how do I step up my game in terms of confidence. I have a short course, of course, that is popular on that topic that you might find interesting. This is becoming good.
What's that course called?
Good. I think it's called Building Self-Confidence.
Okay.
But I'm so happy you asked because one of my favorite things, you're talking about year end and where are we in business and bigger topics too. One of my favorite things is that issues around mental health in general, from stress and well-being to confidence and more difficult topics, are becoming mainstream slowly but surely and more approachable and more resources from my course to 700 other things you might want to go find. And that's going to make us happier, healthier, productive people long term. So that makes me happy.
Do you find that when you're thinking about new courses or you're thinking about like new content to put out, do you think about like, okay, mental health is becoming, sort of more accepted, so I'm going to create content around that? Or like, how do you decide, because you do have 30 courses on LinkedIn, and I know you also have written books. We'll talk about that and other stuff, but how do you pick, I guess, what subjects to kind of lean into more?
Well, it's definitely what might be needed right now, what might be popular right now, combined with what I'm fascinated by, because I don't want to do things that I just do because it might be a product that will sell. Yeah. I can't do that. I'm not wired that way at all. So, for example, I just finished 5 new courses and they're in post right now. And I don't know if they're going to end up at LinkedIn Learning, which I am very hopeful about, or somewhere else. They're going to end up somewhere. 2 of them have to do with change. Now, I'm not a psychologist, but I was trained by one of the jokes in my life. And I'm a management PhD, org behavior, for people that are interested. But a lot of what I do speaks to that world in some way, such as understanding as a leader how to help others cope with difficult changes. That's one of the courses. Another one is personal strategies for dealing with very difficult circumstances that happen to all of us in life. I think they speak directly to well-being. And because I've heard so many, I know you have too, heard so many interesting, difficult, heart-wrenching stories from people over the last couple of years, I felt highly compelled and highly interested to get a little more focused on addressing that for people.
Well, and I think so many of these issues are tied into each other as well. There's so much overlap that happens where, leadership, confidence, mental health, it's like a mixed bag. It's one big mixed bag.
Absolutely. I'm a leadership generalist, and people go, well, yeah, but do you talk about motivation? I go, yes, motivation, conflict, communication, all those are all, just like you said. I don't know how you study one of them, to be honest with you. What happens in a team is 20 different things on a regular basis, but they're the 20 recurring things we can go study in an effort to help people at work. So you're right.
What would you say to somebody who, and by the way, that somebody might be me, that's like, okay, we have 7 weeks left in 2021. We're thinking about 2022. We're thinking about our goals. We're thinking about what we want to, like, how do we make, I guess, not quick decisions, but if someone's like, okay, I want to start a side hustle, or I want to start something Jan 1, like Jan 1, I want, new year, new me to kind of start. What advice do you give to people to kind of start making faster decisions or quicker decisions? Like, okay, you can't languish on this for like 3 months because by that point the new year started.
I've been working on that novel for 10 years now.
Right. It's like, okay, let's.
So, I mean, the answer is difficult and useful. So I'm going to answer your question in a way that people probably didn't see coming. You've got to expect, get ready for, and embrace some difficult stuff. What I mean by that is when you start that, I'm going to be a personal trainer side hustle. That when you start that, I'm going to be a professional speaker and write books guy side hustle. When you start whatever it might be, it's going to feel great in moments because you're trying to live with some purpose. And I'm so happy about that. It's also true that there's a learning curve. Duh. And you got to struggle and fight to get up that learning curve. And it's going to take a while, maybe years. I can promise you this. I get on stage, I slay with a speech, slay. But the first couple of years, I was minimally acceptable. 5 years in, I was a solid A- maybe. 20 years in, I'm great. It takes time. Just know that and be happy that you're on that journey and be ready for some people to go, yeah, like Kim and I would. And then some people aren't going to get it. They're not bad people, by the way, necessarily, but they're not going to get it. Have your eyes open to those things because you've got to jump in right now in the deep end, or you're just going to sit on those ideas, those things you'll get to later forever. Don't do that.
Forever. And it kind of sparks this great point from Jeff, which kind of builds on that. Let's say you think you're slaying, like you think you're slaying at work, you're killing it at your side hustle, whatever. But then all of a sudden, like feedback or reviews, or maybe these 360 things start to come in and it's like, oh, you're not actually slaying. Like, people actually thought that kind of was terrible. How do you get over it? Or how do you orient yourself when something like that happens?
It's happened to me. It's happened to almost all of us, for sure. And that's useful. The question is, how do you deal with feedback? So, you know what's your tolerance for risk is kind of the beginning of the answer. What's your tolerance for risk? You could just try and listen and go, they're probably right, and I should follow through accordingly in the direction they push me. That's an option. I don't like it that much. Another option is to disregard them completely and assume that your grip on reality is clearer than theirs and go your own way, which might feel great in the moment and could tank your career at the current place that you're working because you chose to disregard them. Reality, the smart move somewhere, of course, in the middle. You want to really think through the 80-20. What's the large minority maybe of what they said that I don't care if it hurts. I've got to figure out how to process, get some more feedback on, and use in my current working environment, my current context to help moving forward. But I'm going to let some of it go. I don't have all day to think about how I'm imperfect. So where's the low-hanging fruit is the way I would say that. We all have it. Sometimes they don't get you. Fine. You're still employed there. You've got to deal with that for a little while. Now, if you're talking about a side hustle, then it's a little more visceral because now you're talking about clients and customers who are giving you feedback, meaning they didn't hire you for the speech, Todd, or whatever it might be. And you got to ask yourself, who is your tribe? One of the biggest year-end pieces of advice I would give anybody listening is that you got to ask yourself, are you trying to go find your tribe, so to speak, or please everyone? Because you can't do both. I'll use me just as an obvious example. When you look like this, you do not get hired for every corporate speaking gig because you do not meet the dress code. I've been told this many times. I'm not kidding. It's happened to me many times. And I say to you, and it took me a while to get here, that's okay. It is, because the people who listen and read the things and hire me to speak, they want to know more. They get past the outer shell and they want to connect. And that's my group, my people. So your people isn't everyone, and that is okay. Start now and you'll figure out how to craft that message in a way that makes it clear whether or not they're going to follow you or not.
Well, absolutely. And I love this point that Mark makes as well, which is super interesting, about how do you take that feedback, or how do you take kind of the messages that the market might be sending you and kind of walk the line of accountability and empathy. I mean, with leadership, it's a fine line. It's a fine line on how to navigate that. What kind of best advice or best tips and tricks have you seen for this?
Well, it's a great question. If I hear it correctly, how do you hold people accountable to standards while being a positive, useful, supportive, full of empathy type person? The answer is just what I said. Standards are the first step, because without them, no amount of nice will ever create productivity. Let me say that again. I just made it up. It's going to be a great quote. You start with standards, period, because without them, no amount of nicety, no amount of positivity will ever create great performance. That's just the truth. So you got to have declared, cleared, discussed, maybe even mutually agreed upon, which is the ideal standards of what will be achieved over various bits of time. And then you have to have consistent, probably the biggest word in the answer for the topic of accountability, consistent, holding people to that standard. That starts with you, another old maxim. That starts with you doing it to yourself first so that others know you're leading the way by example. And then it starts with, the people that are easiest, don't neglect them. That's what we do to our superstars too often because we don't need to micromanage them. Don't do that. Go give them props, articulate what you saw that was so great and encourage them to keep moving. Then here's where the big empathy part of that question he posed comes. You've got the people that did good but not great and the people that did maybe not so good. You still start with the standards and the discussion of how they did relative to them, because if you don't, there's just all kinds of risks in a professional context that then become more apparent. So start with the deviation that brought you to this conversation. But here's the empathy part. You do it lovingly, kindly, respectfully, positively. Now, if that sounds strange to your ears, you need to study communication. There's tons of people like me out there talking about these things. You can say that wasn't quite good enough, and I'd like to get specific about how we can get you where we both want you to be. And you can do that positively, constructively, all while telling them they fell short. Yes, that can be done. The best leaders absolutely know how to say, you're imperfect just like me, and that's okay. Let's talk about how we get better.
I love that step-by-step process. I will remind everybody again, if you did not write that down very quickly, you can go to sendmenotes.com and we will send you the notes on that because that's such a good framework to really think about how to give feedback to people, what the accountability part, the empathy part, and really stepping into that. I also I really like this point by Giacomo really going into, boundaries, I feel like is such a hot topic right now as we work from home or live from work, or the boundaries seem to also kind of go out the window a little bit when it comes to work these days. So when we're thinking about that, working on our goals and also having boundaries, work, life, choices, balance, whatever you want to call it, when we think about that for 2022, of really setting us up for success,
Yep.
And for ourselves and other people on our team, do you have like a framework or something that you kind of fall back on when it comes to setting up positive boundaries for yourself and for other people?
Yeah. So I think everyone should be doing some sort of personal reflection in the service of self-awareness and self-improvement. Now, you might do that through one thing or a combination of things. It could be journaling. Very common, very productive on a piece of paper or with your computer, where you're just trying to do a little meta analysis, thinking about how you're thinking about how you're feeling, thinking about the decisions, thinking about how things are going, thinking about the changes you might make as a result to improve your happiness and your productivity, etc. This is a beautiful thing. Most people don't have space to think. Others want counselors of some type that are professional that can help facilitate these conversations. That's great. But what I would say is when you have those times, that self-analysis context, when you're engaging that, think about the times you feel great and why you felt great. Think about the times you just did not feel great. And is there a best explanation as to why that's true? What behaviors or actions do you change to increase that positive a little more, decrease that negative a little more? That's a simple way to start thinking. I would say in general, if you're a leader of others especially, don't forget this. There's how you think about yourself. Kim, you know this. There's how you think about yourself. And then there's how the average person around you thinks about you. Those two things are not the same. There's always a perceptual gap. So you do all the thinking I've been talking about for the last bit of this rant, and that's great. But then the step two that makes it all eventually useful is trying to reduce the size of the perceptual gap between how you think about yourself and how others think about you. Now, if you're a leader, that means stop assuming so darn much about your people. Start having more conversations that allow them to reveal their thoughts on whatever the issue might be that you're all talking about. So if you're looking at 2022 and you're trying to be successful, make sure you are regularly, even if you have to put it on the calendar, doing that self-reflective time. Step one. Step two, you do some things with empowering others to give you feedback so you can start to reduce that perceptual gap just a little bit. That makes you a far more productive decision maker at work.
Oh yeah, I'm all about getting the feedback from other people, because how you see yourself is never how other people see you. And you can think about it in your personal life. There are days where I'm like, my hair looks so bad today, and everyone's like, your hair looks fine, but to me, I'm
Yeah,
like, it's
I get that a
terrible,
lot.
don't you see? So you are not objective when it comes to yourself by any stretch of the imagination at all. So
Nope.
I'm super curious about that. And I want to touch on this point from Jeff too, which is, if you are a top tier kind of technical performer, who's maybe like a little disruptive, like a little bit of a mover and shaker, how do how do you navigate that? Kind of
Well,
an interesting question.
if I was talking to a person who knew that that was them, I would say, "Ooh, most people who actually are seen as problematic at work are meaningfully unaware of it." That's a fairly consistent truth, which means you have received radically strong feedback, which means you, in fact, are in jeopardy. And I want to talk to you about how you can fix this before they actually fire you. If that was an individual, that's the conversation I would have. But what I would say to anyone out there in a leadership role of any kind is as follows: believe me, we often overlook kind of unpleasant, I'll say, interpersonal behaviors when the performance is really strong. And that, with very few exceptions, is a mistake. No amount of great talent justifies bad behavior on a consistent basis at work. Now, 30, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, people had to say, like me, had to say, take my word for it. We don't anymore. There's just mountains and mountains of org science out there that studies teams, why they tick and how they act. And the truth is, talented people with problematic issues in terms of personality and behaviors absolutely can be the apple that spoils the whole barrel. You cannot allow that. High performing organizations that I've had a chance to witness, it is rare to see a very talented, problematic on the person side type of individual stay for very long at all, because they'll get coached, they'll get counseled, they'll be given a second chance, and then they'll be given an opportunity to go be that unpleasant person somewhere else.
I'll be like, on to the next.
Yeah.
And when we think about kind of on to the next, and again, like new year goals, etc., one of that is going to be, if you are stretching for something, maybe you're starting that side hustle, or you want to get that promotion, or you want to switch jobs, or whatever it is. It also is about taking risk. You're leaving the safe harbor and out onto the open seas. So, when you are thinking about and evaluating risks, I definitely wanted to get your insight on this, and, to kind of touch on the new book,
Okay.
Live Hard, which I think also kind of ties in with this. So I'm curious, what kind of best advice or kind of top tips and tricks do you give to people who are thinking about evaluating risk, or even just how to think about risk?
It's a great topic. Thanks for mentioning Live Hard, a fun book of stories, by the way. The reason it's one of the big themes in the book is because, in my experience, one of the common recurring things that humans I've been lucky enough to meet struggle with is this idea of risk. Now, what I mean by that is that most people tend to be, in social contexts, especially professional social contexts, tend to be risk averse. They tend to dream about and not try to act on this thing they wish they could accomplish, that project spot they really wanted, that shift from this functional area to that functional area, the career transformation, because you know what? I'm not an accountant and I was supposed to be a therapist, or whatever the thing might be, starting that small side hustle, whatever it might be. We find reasons and then take comfort in them to not take those risks. And so I just say this quite simply, and I am one of gazillions who've said this in the past, of course. Life is short. You have made a monster out of nothing. Life is short. Why are you so worried? If this thing goes bad, you're going to learn a ton about your competence, a ton about how people who had to help you feel about you for real. And you're going to learn and use that the next time you try to make a move. Nobody interesting that we've ever heard about on a book, a blog, or a podcast avoided risks. They tried to engage them eyes open, smart, and ready to learn, because they know it's going to hurt a little before it starts to feel really awesome. But as long as you know that, I don't know why you're so worried. If you plan for a small business, which means you saved and you did your homework like you're supposed to before you launch, failing isn't the end of the world. It's only the end of the world when you didn't prepare correctly. Same for any big work, any big move inside corporate life, Kim. It's not the people regretting it who just are so mad they took the risk. The people who regret it are just the ones who didn't prepare for it correctly. Thoughtfulness with your mentor, your coach, whether it's saving money for the side hustle, or really understanding the politics behind an issue at work, whatever it might be. Take your time, be thoughtful, do the homework long before you pull the trigger. That's the key to making them lower risk. You never get rid of the risk, but lower risk.
You definitely do the homework. And I always like to say, like, dream up your worst case scenario. And if you can start to stomach the worst case scenario, then you're like, okay, that doesn't seem as risky, because the worst case scenario, I've thought about it and I've addressed, what would happen if that transpires. So I thought this is such a good sort of last question before we get into the lightning round, which is, you are so inspiring, and you're inspiring us and everybody who's joining us today. Who inspires you?
Wow. Well, thank you. First of all, it's very, very, very sweet comment. A lot of people, I have long said that artists and entrepreneurs are highly undervalued in our society. And if we were going to replace the politicians we all think are so suspect on both sides of the aisle, we should go after entrepreneurs, and small business people and artists would probably be better off. But anyhow, just a rant, forgive me. I've got one best answer to that question, and it's my father, and he's been gone for a long time. But the reason it's my dad, and I've talked about this on stage many times, I've written about this many times, he was a very problematic alcoholic, and statistically did something amazing that most fail to do, which is to get past that disease and stay in recovery once you make that decision for the rest. He had 12 years of beautiful, beautiful life. And during that 12 years, I went from a person who I hated to my best friend, and we became inseparable best friends. And it was a beautiful thing. What he proved to me is that it's not just a thing you say. Personal transformation is possible. You hear a lot of people talk about it, write about it. I'm one of them. Having said that, he brought it to life in a hilariously real, impactful way for me in my life, which is why I think I'm having a little success, because people know I mean it when I talk about it, and I give him the thanks for that.
Well, you haven't mean it. You've lived it. You've lived it. You've seen it. You've experienced it. That's such a wonderful example. And thank you for sharing that with us, so that we can kind of live through it as well. So this is my favorite part, like the speed round questions, where we basically just straight up copy all your homework. So hope you're in the mood for that,
Okay.
for us to copy off your paper. But is there something that you have started using or doing lately? It could be an app, or it could be a practice that you are obsessed with. You're like, this thing is so awesome, I gotta tell everybody about it.
I have one that I think fits the bill. It's a practice. My youngest son is a freshman in high school, and he made the freshman basketball team. And so practice is 6:30 in the morning. And the way I function in the morning when I have to get in there is that I need to be up more than 5 minutes. I like to be up for a while, coffee, gather thoughts, read the news, look at the schedule, start to work. And so I've been getting up at 4 to get him to practice by 6:30. And when I'm alone and the world's sleeping, or I'm in the car, especially after I drop him off and it's just me on empty streets in Houston, Texas, the thoughts flow. And it's so beautiful. I somehow feel like while the world's sleeping, my brain works better now. I don't know if that would work for you, but it's been a huge fun surprise for me. So give it a shot. Maybe getting up early once a week might be a mental stimulus for you as well.
I like that. It's fun to kind of try new things and see what sets off like the brain sparks for you.
Yep.
100%. Okay. What is the best thing that you've done or bought for yourself in the last year? So it could be like a physical item that you've bought for yourself, or it just could be like a learning experience or vacation or something that you've done that you're like, that was so powerful.
Well, this is trivial, but I'll say it anyway. So I like to be in the kitchen, but I've never been accused of being great in the kitchen. So, I bought a wok. I had no huge history that explained why I should buy a good wok, but I did. I bought a great wok, and somehow my kitchen activity has gone up and the quality is better. Why? Because to your point just a second ago, sometimes it's as simple as experimenting and trying things to see what fits you. Maybe the wok fits me better than the skillet, so you should try it too.
I love that. Well, I guess that it flows right into my next question, which is there something that maybe like when the holidays are here and things are a little quiet, or maybe next year, that you're really hoping to learn, that's kind of like on your to-do learn list?
Well, yeah, I'm kind of concerned. I don't know how useful this will be to your audience, but I'm kind of concerned with telling long form stories. Now, telling stories is a big part of what I do for a living, but I've never written a novel, which is usually 80, 90,000 words, something like that. Most of my books are 30, 40. I just finished a draft of a new one, which is over 50, and it's a business fable, which I'm very excited about. It's the longest form story I've ever done, but you know what they say, you're not growing and learning until you're a little uncomfortable. And I got a little uncomfortable trying to kick out this length of thing for the first time. So it's, I would say, a generic answer to your audience. It's a new skill for me. I am drinking my own Kool-Aid, as they say, forgive me, and pushing myself into an area that makes me a little uncomfortable because I want to build this new skill. And so I just like sharing that with people because I don't know how it's going to work, but you all face the same opportunity, whether it's writing long stories or something else. You got to push yourself into a little bit of that discomfort and learn to be okay with it, or you're never going to build new skills.
You're never going to do it. And I have to share this amazing dad joke from Jeff, which is walk a mile in Todd's shoes. So good. We just had to like bring that up to the surface because it's too good not to. But I'm curious, you know, as people are looking into 2022 and looking for kind of inspiration, especially when it comes to, you know, these crazy things, our phones and digitally, are there humans or accounts that you follow, whether it's on LinkedIn or Twitter or Instagram or anything, that you're just like, oh, every time their content pops up or every time they're doing something, it's so inspiring to me. Do you have like 3 or 4 kind of favorite go-to accounts that you feel like really brighten up your feed?
I have a lot, and I'm going to save one that's not even a LinkedIn one for the end, but sometimes I wish I understood marketing better as a part of what I do, and I'm decent at that at best. I'm more of a great content creator, and people find it or they don't. Stan Phelps, a friend of mine who we connect a lot online. I've had dinner with him, thankfully, once or twice. Good guy. You really should look at his content because it's just thoughtful and colorful and makes you think about how you're running your business. I really think you should check him out. When I think about leadership stuff, there's a whole bunch of people. You're one of them that has productive ideas out there for sure. Absolutely. I think of Sarah Canaday, a LinkedIn learning author, good friend of mine, does a lot of practical leadership and career advice. You want to check her out. Maybe the one I'm binging on the most, though, lately is a podcaster. Now, one of my loves that's not quite germane here is comedy. I love comedians. I think they're the bravest amongst us. And one of my favorites is Mark Maron, who has a podcast called WTF. And if you're into the small business idea or innovation at work, you're into creativity. And his podcast is focused on musicians and other types of creative types and doing long form, just kind of raw in your face interviews that are wonderfully, surprisingly authentic. And if you like creativity and how creative people, as crazy as we might be, look at the world, I think you would love that podcast, and maybe it would help you feel a little more like embracing those risks yourself.
Ooh, I like those. And I always love a good podcast recommendation. I feel like those are good, especially like walks and washing dishes and laundry. It's like such a good kind of go-to learning thing. So
I love it.
I'm curious for you, do you have a 2022 goal, or I sort of hate the word New Year's resolution, but we'll go with it. Like, do you have something that you are hoping that the new year you either accomplish or do, or kind of something that you're working towards?
Yeah, I mean, I've got plenty. That's why people with side hustles that become jobs like you and me are the way we are. We have no trouble answering that question. The real trouble is going, can I focus on 5 instead of 50 of them? So for me, I'm trying to embrace some of the ideals I teach and preach all the time instead of just teaching and preaching them. That's an interesting thing for advice givers to ponder sometimes. How much do I do what I tell others to do? One of them I've struggled with that I'm getting a lot better at, it's so fun to share, is delayed gratification. Things taste better when you had to work hard for them. So instead of, I like craft beer, shocking, and you get to be a certain age and the pounds come on easier. I got to tell you, earning those and really tying them to the finishing that task over there, for example, before I'll allow myself to indulge in that craft ale, is a useful strategy. And I'm not kidding. Since I've been doing it for a few months, pretty steady, it really does make it taste better. No joke. And it works on any indulgence that you want to try. Earn it and spread it out a little more. No, just doing it for the sake of doing it. Now, in terms of standard goals, I just finished a draft of the next book. Very excited. It's called Kill the Monster. There's a title for you. I don't know what's going to happen with that yet. It's still very early, but I'm excited about it. And for 2022, you should watch me. I'll probably put out 5 to 10 new courses at least.
Wow, holy moly. I'm excited. Okay, if you could we love homework. This crew that meets every single week, we love homework. So if you could give us all a homework assignment that you think would kind of make our lives better, what would that homework, it could be to like listen to something, read something, sign up for something. What would your homework assignment to all of us be?
Well, I think of lots of things there. Let me try this one. This is an activity I've done with a lot of professionals in a lot of settings. And if you struggle at all, especially with your New Year's resolutions, which I see I see pros and cons for those. But if you struggle with that and nonetheless you're looking ahead and you're thinking, what do I do? Let me give you the simple activity that might be terribly useful. It's called Stop, Start, Change. I want you to think through one thing you probably need to stop in your life if you're going to be happier and more productive. One thing you've got to start doing if you're going to be happier and more productive. And one thing, maybe it's going to still be in your life, but you're going to change how you do it for darn sure if you're going to be happier and more productive. What might those three things be? If you can even articulate two of them and you're brave enough in the first quarter to jump on those, you're going to have a pretty good 2022.
I love that. Stop, start, change. Okay. If you do the stop, start, change, please post either your stop or your start or your change on socials and tag Todd and I so that we can see what you are starting, stopping, or changing. I know I'm going to be doing this assignment this week for sure, and I will tag you, Todd. Absolutely. This is
Sweet.
Such a good homework assignment. Where can people keep learning from you, getting all of your golden nuggets of wisdom straight into their brains?
Well, thank you for asking. I have to say a huge thanks to everyone that showed up, and such a wonderfully vibrant bunch of chat going on there. There's no way we could have talked to everyone. I apologize. I also make you this offer. Just reach out on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect. Just reach out and tell me whatever that question might have been we didn't get to today. I would love to answer it for you. I think social media is interesting, but the short answer to your question is I'm really focused on LinkedIn. That's where you'll find me talking and lurking and responding to people. So come find me there.
I love it. Well, everybody knows now to find Todd, you log on to LinkedIn and say hi. Thank you so much for joining, and thank everybody today for coming in and hopefully sparking some stopping, some starting, and changing in all of us. So I'm gonna cheers you from Austin, Texas. So cheers. Thanks everybody for joining today. Appreciate it.